Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something a bit different. We're focusing in, like really zooming in on just one day, October 6, 2025.
Yeah, not just any random day either. This was a moment where everything seemed to collide. You had global crises flaring up, the U.S. government completely stuck, and then these major legal decisions changing the game all at once.
It's quite the convergence. So we've gathered the reports, the headlines, everything from that single 24-hour window.
And our mission today is basically to unpack that, to look at how the future got shaped, or maybe just really complicated. On this one Tuesday, we're hitting three main areas.
Okay.
First, the American political scene, the gridlock, the legal fights. Second, global hotspots where conflicts were active. And third, the tech and market battlegrounds.
Right. Let's kick off in Washington then with that immediate chaos, because while all this other stuff was happening, Congress was just stalled. This was day 6 of the partial U.S. federal shutdown.
Yep, day 6. Negotiations had totally broken down, the main sticking point. Funding for the Affordable Care Act subsidies. Couldn't agree.
And by this point, day 6, this wasn't just political theater, was it? There were real consequences hitting.
Oh, absolutely.
That's
Specific and pretty harsh.
Yeah.
The White House was actually warning quite openly that mass layoffs of federal workers could be imminent, like starting soon.
Wow.
And you saw the dysfunction right there in the Senate. On that very day, October 6th, they voted down both funding proposals, not just the Republican one, but the Democratic one too. Just stuck.
So, complete gridlock. And if you were, say, trying to fly that day...
You probably felt it.
Yeah.
Our sources show the FAA was reporting significant staffing issues. That meant delays piling up at major airports like Newark, like Denver. So
Yeah.
it stops being abstract budget talk pretty quickly.
It becomes real life.
Exactly. And then the humanitarian angle, programs like WIC,
Yeah.
the nutrition program for mothers and kids, and millions rely on it. They were warning their backup funds were almost gone, maybe only a week or two left.
That's incredibly serious.
It is. And add to that the military deadline. The Pentagon was scrambling because the October 15th pay cycle was looming.
Yeah.
Real concern about troops not getting paid.
Yet, despite all this, the markets...
Kind of shrugged it off
Yeah.
initially, which is remarkable, right? But, the risk to economic growth was definitely building, even if Wall Street wasn't panicking just yet.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. Domestic paralysis. But just down the road, you had this huge constitutional fight brewing. Executive power versus the courts. Specifically over immigration.
Precisely. The administration had been pushing to deploy National Guard units into cities they considered sanctuary jurisdictions. It was aggressive.
And on October 6th.
A major pushback. A federal judge out in Oregon actually blocked the administration.
Yeah.
Said they couldn't deploy Guard troops to Portland like that.
On what grounds?
Concerns about federal overreach, basically. Worries about, using troops in ways that might suppress civil protests or violate civil liberties. A big role.
It had immediate ripple effects.
Yeah. Almost instantly. Hours later, Illinois and Chicago filed their own lawsuit to stop a similar deployment plan there. So you see this legal domino effect.
It really throws that balance of power question into sharp relief, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Federal versus local control. A judge saying no to a White House deployment order in their city.
Absolutely. Test the limits. And speaking of courts testing limits, this brings us straight to the Supreme Court. October 6th was also the official start of their new term, 2025-26.
And they had a packed agenda lined up.
Oh, yeah. Big issues on the docket: transgender rights, campaign finance, social media rules, abortion restrictions, a lot. But they took two actions on October 6th that had immediate, global impact.
Okay, let's unpack those. The first one sounds like it hit the tech world hard, the Google antitrust ruling.
Yeah, this was huge. The court basically refused to step in and pause a lower court's order. This order came out of that big lawsuit Epic Games filed against Google.
And refusing to pause, it means.
It means Google had to comply immediately, implement major changes to its Play Store, right away.
What kind of changes?
Two big ones. Allowing other app stores, basically third-party distribution, on Android devices. And maybe even more importantly, allowing apps to use alternative payment systems, not just Google's own.
Ah, okay, so bypassing the Google tax, essentially.
Exactly. That standard 15-30% cut Google takes. This ruling forces them to allow competition right inside the app for payments. It's expected to fundamentally reshape how mobile apps make money, give developers more options, maybe lower costs for you and me, and it sets a precedent globally for regulating these huge tech platforms.
A really significant move, then, and the second Supreme Court action on that day.
That one provided a different kind of finality. The court rejected Ghislaine Maxwell's final appeal.
Without comment, I read.
Correct. No explanation needed, apparently. This means her 20-year sentence for her role in the Jeffrey Epstein sex trafficking ring stands. After all the legal battles, the appeals, this was the end of the road for her case. A significant moment, especially for the survivors.
Okay, shifting from the U.S. legal system now. Let's look overseas. Global flashpoints. There were attempts at diplomacy on October 6th, right? Particularly concerning Gaza.
Yes, in Egypt. You had Israeli and Hamas delegations in Sharm el-Sheikh for indirect talks. This was under a plan backed by the U.S., with Egypt and Qatar mediating. It felt like maybe the most serious chance for a ceasefire in a while.
Hopeful, but fragile.
Extremely fragile, because even as they were talking, the violence hadn't stopped. Reports came out that day from Gaza health officials, 19 people killed in Israeli strikes in just the 24 hours before the talks began.
So the fighting continued. What were the main obstacles in the talks themselves?
The core issues, really. Israel was demanding Hamas disarm completely. Hamas, on the other hand, insisted on guarantees that Israeli troops would fully withdraw. Huge gaps.
What if they could bridge those gaps?
The potential was significant. A deal could mean hostages released in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, maybe some troop pullbacks, definitely more humanitarian aid getting into Gaza. But getting there looked incredibly difficult on October 6th.
Meanwhile, another major conflict, the Russia-Ukraine war, seemed to be escalating in a different way. Both sides hitting targets deep behind enemy lines.
Yeah, definitely a feature of the war by this point. Ukraine reported successful strikes. That day one on a major Russian explosives factory, another on an oil terminal down in occupied Crimea.
And they made a point about the weapons used.
They did, emphasize they were using domestically produced drones and missiles. It signals their growing ability to hit Russia's war machine, its supply lines, its factories, with their own stuff. Less reliance on Western stockpiles for these deep strikes.
But Russia responded fiercely.
Massively. Overnight into October 6th, they launched this huge barrage. Over 50 missiles, and reports said nearly 500 drones, just swarms of them.
500, that's staggering, the impact.
Tragic. At least 5 civilians were killed across Ukraine, widespread power outages. And it caused jitters nearby, too. Poland scrambled its fighter jets just to make sure its own airspace was secure during the onslaught. Highlights those spillover risks.
Okay, now, this next development from October 6th seems complex and controversial. U.S. military actions in Latin America.
Yeah, this raised eyebrows. U.S. forces conducted a strike, bombed a boat off the Venezuelan coast. Reports said 4 people were killed.
And the justification given?
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth stated it was an anti-drug trafficking operation.
Mm-hmm.
But crucially, there was no immediate evidence provided publicly to back that claim up.
Predictably, that caused backlash.
Oh, definitely. Colombian President Gustavo Petro immediately condemned it, called it an extrajudicial killing. But the really illuminating part came from news that broke the same day.
Which was?
It emerged that the U.S. Department of Justice had issued a classified legal memo. And this memo apparently justified using deadly force against a secret list of designated drug cartels and traffickers. Globally.
Whoa, okay, let's pause there. A classified legal justification for targeted killings related to drug trafficking, not just terrorism, outside of active war zones.
Exactly, that's the implication. It suggests a major expansion of executive authority, operating under secrecy, to target non-state actors based on narcotics intelligence. Bypassing Congress, little transparency.
That feels like a pretty significant shift in the rules of engagement, so to speak.
It really does.
Yeah.
Fuels that whole debate about executive power, secrecy, accountability. Especially when strikes like the one off Venezuela happen without clear public evidence and draw condemnation from regional partners. It's a big piece of that day's puzzle about changing global norms.
And tied into global strategy, we also saw more moves in the U.S.-China tech sphere.
Yep, the tech decoupling continued. The FCC was reported to be prepping even tighter restrictions on Chinese telecom gear. Companies like Huawei, ZTE.
Building on existing bans.
Right, making it harder to use their equipment in U.S. networks, citing security risks. But it creates this real problem for, say, smaller, rural internet providers who've relied on that cheaper equipment for years. Now they face huge costs to rip and replace it. So national security versus economic reality for some.
Okay, let's shift to the third major zone, the economic and scientific frontiers on October 6th. Despite the shutdown, tech world was buzzing. What was the big news?
Probably the biggest was about the AI race.
Yeah.
Major reports surfaced that OpenAI was making a big move, striking a deal to use AMD's hardware.
AMD, not Nvidia.
Exactly. diversifying away from Nvidia, which had pretty much dominated the high-end AI chip market up to that point.
What's the significance there? Why does that matter?
It signals that the huge players, the ones buying tons of these chips for AI, aren't going to rely on just one supplier anymore. Nvidia's dominance is being challenged. It validates AMD's strategy and suggests, a more competitive landscape for the actual infrastructure powering AI. That's good for supply chains, probably good for prices eventually.
And yet, as we mentioned, the stock market seemed oddly cheerful that day, despite the shutdown chaos. S&P 500, NASDAQ, both up.
Yeah, that weird disconnect again. It tells you a couple of things, I think. One, the hype around AI and tech was so strong, it was almost insulated from the political mess in D.C. Investors were focused on that growth narrative.
And two.
Two, maybe the markets just saw this shutdown as like temporary noise, political theater that would eventually get resolved, not something that fundamentally breaks the economy, especially when tech seems to be driving things.
That this shutdown was having real economic effects elsewhere, right? It wasn't just theater for everyone.
Oh, absolutely not. Look at agriculture. The White House was reportedly considering a huge bailout, like $10, $15 billion, for farmers who were getting hit by trade problems.
Okay, but the shutdown complicates that.
Completely. Because Congress needs to act to adjust spending caps to refill the funds for something like the Commodity Credit Corporation, the CCC, which pays out that kind of aid. And with Congress gridlocked by the shutdown, they couldn't easily approve or fund that relief. So real economic pain facing delays.
And international partners were watching this U.S. dysfunction with concern.
You bet. In Canada, for instance, the opposition was really pushing the government hard that day to lock in a trade deal with the U.S. Why? Because they were worried about potential future tariffs in the Trump administration hitting Canadian industries. Shows how U.S. political instability creates global economic anxiety.
Okay, let's step back from politics and markets for a second. October 6th also saw a major scientific recognition, the Nobel Prize.
Yes, in physiology or medicine, it went to 3 researchers, Mary Ibranco, Fred Ramsdell, and Shimon Sakaguchi.
And their discovery was about
immune self-tolerance. Basically how our immune system learns not to attack our own body. They identified key players in this process: regulatory T cells, or Tregs, and the gene that controls them, FOXP3.
So for someone who isn't an immunologist, break that down. Why is self-tolerance so important?
Think of it like this. Your immune system is supposed to fight off invaders like bacteria or viruses, but sometimes it mistakenly attacks your own healthy cells. That's autoimmune disease like type 1 diabetes or rheumatoid arthritis. These Tregs, directed by the FOXP3 gene, are like the quality control managers. They tell the attack cells, hey, stand down, that's one of ours, don't shoot. They maintain peace and prevent friendly fire. Discovering these Tregs and their control switch was fundamental.
And the practical impact today, where does that research lead?
It's foundational for a ton of cutting-edge medicine. Clinical trials trying to treat autoimmune diseases, inflammatory disorders, even trying to make organ transplants more successful by manipulating these Tregs to boost tolerance. Huge implications.
And finally, on the health front that day, there was also some controversy brewing at the CDC.
Yeah, quite a significant policy shift was announced, or at least called for. The acting CDC director urged vaccine manufacturers to develop 3 separate shots for measles, mumps, and rubella instead of the combined MMR vaccine we all get.
Separate them out. Why?
Well, the context is key. This call came after unconfirmed reports and online chatter about potential adverse events linked to the combined vaccine. So it looked like a major policy direction, possibly being influenced by online claims rather than conclusive new scientific data.
Raising questions about how public health policy gets made in the digital age.
Exactly. The interplay between online information, public anxiety, and regulatory decisions. It was a notable development on that already packed day.
What an incredible snapshot October 6th provides. You've got the highest court intervening in a global tech monopoly while Congress can't even agree to keep the government funded.
It really boils down to that theme, acceleration versus paralysis. You see technology like AI accelerating. You see definitions of military power expanding under classified memos. Geopolitical risks in places like Gaza and Ukraine are speeding up.
While domestically in the U.S. system.
Paralysis, gridlock, inability to respond effectively, at least through traditional legislative means.
Which leaves us with a pretty stark question for you listening to this deep dive. We saw these huge shifts on October 6th in tech power with Google and AMD, in military authority, in the AI race. If the domestic political scene exemplified by that shutdown keeps consuming all the oxygen in Washington,
How long before these rapidly accelerating global and tech forces just leave U.S. policy and maybe even countries relying on U.S. stability completely behind?